Okay, now we're going to give you an example of a lesson plan that is going to illustrate the concept, principle, context, and then movement detail formula. So we're going to use the leg drag, right? Or he's going to be on his back. So normally, like if we're starting a lesson, the first thing we're going to do is give you, just quickly be like, hey, here's what we're working on. We're working on the leg drag pass. The leg drag pass is an example of a lever to the hip, and I might just show the movement just so people can kind of visually engage with what's happening rather than listening to me talk for a couple minutes. So that would be the first thing we'll usually do, is just make sure that they can just kind of see what's going on. We're going to be going over the leg drag pass today. The leg drag pass is an example of lever to the hip control. All right? The context that we're going to give is we're dealing with a recumbent guard. If our partner were seated, we wouldn't be able to do a leg drag pass, so we would enter, we would win the hand fight, which is an example of controlling like the lever to the shoulder, and then creating good timing, accessing the lever to the hip, putting our partner on our back. All right? Once we create this control, we're going to explain the principle that we're going to be using. The principle that we're going to be using here is that passes tend to be more successful if we get our partner's hips to face away from us and if we can be facing them. We're also going to create the context that there's no way that we're going to be able to successfully do a leg drag unless we can create a movement-based response. So we're actually going to initiate the leg drag in this case with a different pass that almost never works. I'm going to create double ankle control. I'm going to step out to the side and create frames, locking his hips in place, which is going to mean he's going to want to turn to face me. So the context we're creating here is that good guard passers will face you with their hips because they'll know that if your hips start to go that way, they're going to be in trouble. It's going to be harder for them to retain. So the initial pass is going to be based on the idea that if I can lock his hips in place, I can just walk around his guard. So we just warm up with that just so that people understand that the pass is starting by going in the opposite direction that they're actually going to pass. So we go like this a few times. Then the context then becomes, and it's also just, again, it serves as a proper movement-based warm-up that's not random moves with no precision or context. We start with the control scheme, which is going to be to create frames on top of the shins. If I'm gripping this way, again, it's not going to work on anyone good. This is all part of context, right? This is also part of concept, because the concept is if I create a frame, then there's physically no way for him to just push through that frame. If I grip like this, this is attribute based. So now we're getting a little bit into detail. There we go. So once I have this control, as I rotate, my partner is immediately going to face me. So now we're teaching our partner, right, within that context section of how to be a good uke and respond just with a very minimal hip adjustment. Right? That's all he really needs to do. So as I turn, he follows me. I use that to redirect his legs. Right? So I'm understanding, in this case, the concept of momentum. So I'm trying to gain the control of my partner's momentum, and then I'm stepping in, and I'm using my shin to redirect his hip. Right? One of the things we're going to do now is illustrate one of our, again, important concepts, which is the placeholder system. So the placeholder system dictates that if I'm performing a function that has some sort of controlling effect, then I need to have something take its place before I let go. If I simply went to here and let go of Rory's leg and tried to finish the drag, he'd be able to gain hip articulation and high leg. Whereas if I have walked this way, redirected his legs, and then I've stepped into here and continued to drive in, it's very difficult for him to high leg. Now I replace this control of this top lever, because again, if I just let go now, he can use that to frame me. So I get to here, and now I'm denying him base. So again, we're talking about a physical concept. There we go, hooking this leg, denying him base. And then we go through the follow-up lesson. Like we would stop here, because this, when we're talking about a level of movement and detail, the details that we're giving you, how to utilize the grip, how to turn the hips, how to step in, making sure that we're pushing with the shin, how to beat the legs. That's a fair bit of detail, particularly for somebody who's never seen this movement before. So if we try to teach you the whole leg drag where you end up in side control or on the back, that can be an overwhelming amount of detail. So we'll start, the first section will literally just be, here's how we put someone on their back, right? That's creating a context for the movement, right? Here's how we actually physically control their legs so that we can either move around them if they don't respond, and that's an example of the concept of controlling the lever to the hip and using frames. and then we're going to give you the response. So before we do the actual leg drag, we do, it's like a minute or two. Put them on their back, walk around them, and we give them the context of why that's going to draw a response by a high-level guard player. We give you the principle of we want to face the hips away because that makes our passing easier, and we give you the specific concepts that we're using, which might be lever to the hip in this case, or proper framing in the case of grip control. So every one of those things matters, and then we're going through the actual movements, which is like how to maintain your own alignment. When we're stepping, we're kind of driving our shin in, creating what we call a hockey stride because we're Canadians. So that's our reference point. So we're using the hockey stride movement, and then we will, again, go through the placeholder system. Why is it important? Why is it only going to work against good people if you do it this way and not if you just let go? And then we might even get into a little bit of timing and how one of these things can be a little bit off if your timing is really good and you're really fast. But then we're going to illustrate that that is an attribute-based thing. So if I'm really quick, for instance, I can leg drag you this way. That's not wrong, and it certainly can work, and it can even work at the high level. But it will only work at the high level if you're really quick and your partner's maybe a little bit slow on the draw, maybe a little bit exhausted or whatever, or just frankly doesn't have good guard retention. So we want to illustrate the difference between why is this working, when is it working, who is it working on? If you do it in a slightly different way, what will happen? What are the different possibilities? And the leg drag would be one lesson. So we would normally be introducing that first movement, going through all this concept, principle, context, movement, detail, and then adding the actual leg drag, and then adding, after we get to the leg drag position, we will be reliably getting here in a pretty controlled fashion. And now we have to get into frames. You're going to be dealing with frames, elbow frames sometimes. Sometimes you'll see the famous Bill Cosby frame. Sometimes you'll see this kind of collar grip frame. All kinds of different frames are potentially going to come in. You'll also occasionally see people just turning away and bailing and trying to invert or go to their turtle. Right? So we have to now again create an understanding of what are the concepts? Why does the frame work? Because again, if I leg drag you and you set up a good frame, especially if Rory builds up to his elbow, which is entirely reasonable for him to do. I was like, yeah, I leg dragged him, great, let me pass the guard now. Your leg drag becomes useless, the context is missing. So we have to now go through the same process again. We're gonna give you the concept, frame, and in this case he was using a proper post which absorbed the force vector. If you don't defeat that on a biomechanical physical level, you won't be able to continue through the pass. Right? And then we'll give you the concept that we're going to use, which is regulated tension and changing the angles to defeat the frame. Right? If you can't do it that way, we're going to maybe do it a little bit of a different way. But once we understand the concept of that, then the principle that we're going to teach you is, at this point, when somebody starts to be broken down, they have a choice. They can choose to accept the pass, or they can turn away and give you their back. So that's no longer a physical thing. The way that I do the pass won't necessarily decide if I end up controlling side control or taking your back. That's going to be down to a tactical choice that your opponent is sometimes going to make. So we have to differentiate between the concept and the principle there. And then we'll go through all the details. I don't want this to be like an 80-minute video, but this is the amount of thought that we've put into teaching you one movement, right? The leg drag, how to create a proper context, how to give you the concepts, the principles, and the details, and the movements. And so you can see how this can work for this. And if you refer to any of our videos and you're trying to figure out how to teach them, right? Again, the videos have been presented in a way where we've tried to give you everything in the one video, right? I'm not going to break the lesson down into 4 parts. I'm just going to give you, here's how you do a leg drag. But when you watch the video, if you want to then teach it, now you can break it down into these constituent parts. You know which ones to use because you have terminology that helps you understand what part of the instruction is concept, what part of the instruction is principle, what part of the instruction is context, and what part of the instruction is movement and detail. And once you know that, you can start to construct your own lessons based around the things that you understand well enough to actually convey that. And we're gonna have another video on this idea of teaching what you actually know. So refer to that and just go back and review this maybe a couple times if you need to. Sorry for like trying to suggest that you listen to me yammer any more than you already have, but I can't emphasize enough how powerful some of these tools can be for helping you be a better instructor.